Ghost was right. The more we watch Raising Kanan Season 5, the more obvious it becomes that Breeze was never going to lead anyone toward a better future. He was reckless, unpredictable, and completely addicted to the chaos of the streets. Every move he made brought more violence, more enemies, and more attention. Looking back at everything Ghost said in the original Power, it's becoming harder and harder to argue against him. Breeze really was a bad dude, and if Ghost hadn't pulled the trigger first, there's a very good chance they all would have ended up dead. But here's the twist that Raising Kanan Season 5 Episode 6 is quietly setting up. Ghost may have been right about Breeze, yet he still made one fatal mistake that completely changed the future of the Power universe. It wasn't killing Breeze that came back to haunt him. It was the one person he couldn't bring himself to get rid of. That single decision would create every major problem Ghost faced years later. It would destroy friendships, tear apart families, start wars, poison Tariq's mind, and eventually lead to Ghost standing in truth on the night of his own death. And the scary part is, the clues for all of this aren't just hidden in the original Power anymore. They're already beginning to appear in Raising Kanan. Episode 6 could be another massive piece of that puzzle because the relationship between Kanan and Breeze is becoming stronger. The line between loyalty and manipulation is getting thinner. And we're starting to understand why Ghost eventually believed there was only one way out. So in today's breakdown, we're going to explain why Ghost was absolutely right about Breeze, why Episode 6 is quietly proving his point once again, and most importantly, the one decision Ghost made that ended up changing everything forever. Now, before we get into why Ghost's biggest mistake changed everything, we first have to understand why he believed killing Breeze was the only option in the first place. Because every single episode of Raising Kanan Season 5 is slowly filling in the blanks that Power left behind years ago. Back in the original series, Ghost never went into great detail about Breeze. He didn't spend hours explaining what happened or trying to justify himself. Instead, he said something very simple. Breeze was a bad dude. He was going to get us all killed. At the time, those words sounded like an excuse. Many fans even believed Ghost was simply removing someone who stood between him and his own ambitions. But after watching what Breeze has become in Raising Kanan, those words don't sound like an excuse anymore. They sound like a warning. And that's the biggest difference. The version of Breeze we're seeing isn't just another street boss trying to build an empire. He's someone who genuinely enjoys the chaos that comes with the life. There are criminals who use violence because they have to, and then there are people who actually enjoy it. Breeze clearly belongs in that second category. Every dangerous situation seems to excite him instead of making him cautious. Every gunfight puts a smile on his face instead of fear. That's what makes him so unpredictable, and that's exactly the kind of person Ghost could never build a future around, episode after episode. Breeze continues proving that he doesn't think like Ghost. Ghost always wanted control. He wanted every move planned, every risk calculated, and every problem solved before it became a war. Even in the original Power, one of Ghost's biggest strengths was staying several steps ahead. Whenever Tommy wanted revenge immediately, Ghost usually looked for another way. Whenever violence threatened the business, Ghost tried to contain it before it spread. He understood something that many people around him didn't. The louder you become, the shorter your future becomes. Every shooting brings police attention. Every unnecessary body creates another enemy. Every emotional decision eventually costs money, power, or lives. Now compare that mentality with Breeze. Whenever Breeze gets involved, things immediately become more dangerous. Instead of avoiding conflict, he almost welcomes it. Instead of ending problems quietly, he often creates even bigger ones. We saw it when he handled rivals without thinking about the consequences that could follow. We saw it in the way he carried himself after pulling off dangerous jobs. And perhaps most importantly, we saw it in the way he influences Kanan. That's something Raising Kanan keeps showing us without directly saying it. Kanan isn't just learning how to sell drugs or run corners. He's learning how to think. Every conversation with Breeze shapes the way Kanan views the streets. Breeze teaches him that strength comes from fear. That respect comes through violence. That hesitation is weakness. And while those lessons might help someone survive today, they almost guarantee problems tomorrow. This is where episode 6 becomes incredibly important, based on everything we've seen so far. Kanan is reaching a point where he's starting to trust Breeze more than almost anyone else around him. Every successful move they make together builds that relationship even further. Breeze isn't just becoming Kanan's partner. He's becoming his example. The person Kanan watches before making his own decisions. That's exactly how influence works. It doesn't happen overnight. It grows little by little until one day the student begins thinking exactly like the teacher. And when you look back at the adult Kanan from the original Power, you can actually see traces of Breeze everywhere. Think about how Kanan handled betrayal. Think about how quickly he answered problems with violence. Think about how easily he manipulated people whenever it benefited him. Those aren't habits that appear overnight. Those are behaviors developed over years of learning from someone who lived by those exact same rules. That's why I believe Raising Kanan isn't only telling Breeze's story anymore. It's quietly showing us how Kanan became the man Ghost would eventually fear the most. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Ghost didn't just have one dangerous mentor to deal with. He had two. The first was Breeze himself. The second was the version of Breeze that continued living through Kanan long after Breeze was gone, and that's where Ghost's biggest mistake begins to reveal itself, because eliminating the teacher doesn't erase everything the teacher already passed on. By the time Breeze was eventually removed from the picture, the damage may have already been done. Kanan had already absorbed his mindset, his philosophy, and his way of surviving. In many ways, Ghost succeeded in stopping Breeze, but failed to stop Breeze's influence. And if Raising Kanan Season 5 Episode 6 continues building this relationship the way it has been, then we're watching the exact moment where Ghost's future problems are quietly being created, years before he even realizes it. That's what makes this story so fascinating. The biggest mistake wasn't pulling the trigger on Breeze. It was believing that killing one man would also kill the ideas he left behind. Now this brings us to what I believe is the biggest lesson Ghost learned far too late. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one standing in front of you. It's the person standing beside him, watching everything, learning everything, and slowly becoming even more dangerous than the original. And that's exactly why Raising Kanan Season 5 Episode 6 feels so important. Every episode is making the bond between Breeze and Kanan stronger, and whether Kanan realizes it or not, he's becoming more like Breeze with every passing day. One thing I've noticed throughout this season is that Breeze doesn't simply give Kanan orders. He teaches him how to think. Every conversation feels like a lesson. Every move has a message behind it. Breeze constantly talks about making power moves, staying ahead of rivals, and never showing weakness. But mixed into those lessons is another side of him that Ghost probably recognized before anyone else. Breeze believes fear is the quickest way to gain respect. He believes violence solves almost every problem. And perhaps the most dangerous belief of all, he genuinely enjoys living on the edge. That mindset is exciting in the short term, but it's almost impossible to build something lasting with it. Ghost wanted something completely different. People often forget that Ghost didn't dream about staying on the corners forever. Even when everyone else accepted that life, Ghost wanted more. He wanted legitimate business. He wanted money that couldn't be taken away with one police raid. He wanted to leave the streets before the streets buried him. The problem was that the people closest to him couldn't see that vision. We've already seen enough from Breeze to understand why he would never walk away. For Breeze, the streets aren't just a way to make money. They're who he is. Every risky decision gives him another thrill. Every confrontation feeds his confidence. That's why Ghost eventually realized there was no compromise to be made. You can't convince someone to leave a life they actually enjoy. But here's where the real mistake begins. Ghost understood Breeze. He didn't understand Kanan. Or maybe he understood him too late, because once Ghost removed Breeze, he probably believed the biggest obstacle was gone. He may have thought Kanan would eventually move on, mature, or even begin seeing things differently. Instead, the exact opposite happened. Kanan became everything Breeze represented. When we first met adult Kanan in Power, he wasn't chasing legitimacy. He wasn't trying to build businesses outside the game. He wasn't dreaming about escaping the streets. He was completely committed to that lifestyle. Looking back now, it almost feels inevitable. Where did that mentality come from? Who taught him that survival always comes before loyalty? Who showed him that manipulation is just another weapon? Who con?